This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert renewed his demand that the Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state, ruling out any return of refugees to the lands they left. Palestinians and Israelis are expected to begin a new round of talks at the White House, which will be concluded next month in the region.
الهدف من لقاء أنابوليس كان جمعهم معا حسب ما قال.
According to the American host, the goal of the Annapolis meeting was to bring everyone together, and now that has been achieved. Now what's next? The Palestinian and Israeli sides agreed to enter talks that will lead to a peace agreement before the end of 2008. The talks, which will begin today at the White House, will address the core issues without exception. This is what they said in Annapolis. And this is how the three-way meeting ended. A series of meetings will be launched in order to begin to attempt to discuss the final status issues, the borders, the settlements, Jerusalem, and the return of refugees. Once again, no timeline was mandated and no pledges were made to fulfill the proposed demands. There was no agreement on taking the practical steps to achieve the vision of the host of the conference, which is a Palestinian state living alongside the state of Israel. No doubt that the Arabs who attended the meeting were not disillusioned. They understand that the Palestinian plight is not different from many others. Negotiations that have been aimed at addressing the Palestinian plight have always ended in failure. Agreements were made and then agreements were planned. However, the reality is that if things did not change, they only got worse.
والواقع أنه إن لم يبقى على حاله فإنه يزداد سوءا.
I think we have heard positive things. However, as I said in the beginning, the proof is always going to be in the implementation.
It is easy to speak in phrases about the Middle East, especially about the Palestinian plight. However, implementation is another matter. The initial meetings do not appear encouraging.
No one seriously can think
that there will be two states, one Palestinian and one in which the Palestinians will become a majority, if all the Palestinians will be brought back into the state of Israel. So the idea is to have two nation states separated, living alongside each other. The state of Israel will be Jewish, of course, as it is, and the Palestinian state will be the natural place for all the refugees of Palestinians to be resettled in.
Here, Olmert repeated a condition that he made since the beginning of the preparations for the Annapolis conference. This condition prevents the Palestinian refugees from returning. The new proposal is that the state be recognized based on religion. This idea has never come up in previous talks. Jerusalem is an Arab, Palestinian, and international issue, but Israel has already settled this issue through confiscations, demolitions, and settlements, as well as carrying out projects that make the situation on the ground difficult to change should any peace agreement be made in the future. The latest of these projects was submitted to the Knesset while the preparations were being made for the Annapolis conference. In Annapolis, Olmert did not address the Jewish settlements on the occupied territories, which have expanded, nor did he address the separation wall, which has dashed any dreams for a settlement. As Israel was making promises, the Israeli forces were preoccupied with other matters. This is the Palestinian reality. For years, talks have increased about the creation of a Palestinian state. Palestinians view this demand for a state as a right, which all sides agree is the solution to the conflict. However, the question remains, what will this state look like?
على أي شكل ستكون.
The Israeli and Palestinian delegations were the first to arrive in Annapolis. Before coming here, their American host gave them all the time in the world to reach a consensus. Today, they arrived ahead of time in anticipation that Ms. Condi may convince them to reach a joint declaration, even if it's only symbolic. Without it, all the participants in Annapolis may have to swallow what is left of their pride. This is how the preliminary picture appeared on the first day of the Annapolis conference. However, what's hidden behind the scene is much bigger, as the Iranian fear continues to overshadow the political mood in Annapolis.
Preparations are underway in Annapolis. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Ehud Olmert arrived at the White House, where U.S. President George W. Bush expressed optimism for the diplomatic gathering he is sponsoring.
It's an honor to have you back in the Oval Office. Thanks for coming to the Annapolis conference. I'm looking forward to continuing our serious dialogue with you and the President of the Palestinian Authority to see whether or not peace is possible. I'm optimistic. I know you're optimistic, and I want to thank you for your courage and your friendship. I'm proud of you.
Bush was joined in the Oval Office by his Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and Vice President Cheney, as well as Israel's Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni and Defense Minister Ehud Barak, who cautioned against the Palestinian demands. It seems that the top brass of the Israeli government came out in full force to rally support in an unprecedented show of solidarity with their Prime Minister.
With my colleagues to another time to the Oval Office. This time it's different because we are going to have lots of participants in what I hope will launch a serious process of negotiations between us and the Palestinians.
Accompanied by his Defense Minister Ehud Barak and Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni, Israel's Prime Minister Ehud Olmert arrived at the White House. The Palestinian and Iranian issues were the focus of discussion in the meeting between Olmert and Bush at the Oval Office. In Israel's judgment, Bush will not carry out a military attack against Iran before leaving the White House. Therefore, an Israeli military action is a more feasible solution to the Iranian problem. Meanwhile, the Palestinian and Israeli delegations continue to exert efforts aimed at reaching a joint declaration. The Americans are pushing for a joint declaration that can be presented to all the participants of the conference.
We are now joined by the Director General for the Center of Middle East Studies, Jawad Hamad. Jawad, the report we just watched was broadcast over the Israeli television before the start of the Annapolis conference. In this report, Bush told Olmert that he was optimistic and said to him, "I know that you are optimistic too." Was this optimism evident on the first day of the conference?
Without a doubt, Bush has no choice but to be optimistic, as he is the promoter and the sponsor of the Annapolis conference. How can he not be optimistic, especially since he was the one extending invitations to this large number of Arab foreign ministers and international dignitaries? Bush wants to show that he was able to gather so many leaders in a conference that he is sponsoring and promoting.
He is the host and sponsor of this conference.
He wanted to show the world that Israel is a strategic ally of the United States and its security is part of the U.S. security. He also wants to remind the world that Israel is part of the U.S. vital orbit and that his administration is willing to sacrifice for the sake of Israel, as was the case in certain occasions.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has announced his country will host the next Middle East Peace Conference. He told reporters on his way home from the gathering that the parties had yet to agree on the timing and the agenda of the next meeting. Meanwhile, there were mixed reactions among Palestinians and Israelis on peace prospects after Annapolis. We get more in this report.
Televised speeches from Annapolis about the need for peace had limited resonance among Palestinians and Israelis, still smarting from failed summits that led to more bloodshed in the past. Leaders of the United States, Israel, and the Palestinians agreed with a handshake to immediately launch Middle East peace talks with the goal of reaching a final accord by the end of 2008. Though it was the hardliners on both sides that came out firmly against yesterday's resolution by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert to renew negotiations, reservations were not far from moderates' minds. In Gaza, Hamas held daily mass rallies vowing to block any accord on permanent coexistence with Israel. Similar protests also took place in the West Bank. A Hamas official dismissed a pledge by Abbas to rein in militants as criminal. Ordinary Gazans were divided along political lines over Annapolis.
The results will be bad and negative for Palestinians, more than we expect.
President Abbas's speech was positive since he stressed the importance of prisoners' release, refugees, Jerusalem, and the Palestinians' right to live in peace and security.
Israelis in Tel Aviv were divided over the possible future outcomes.
I'm for putting all the problems, refugee problems, Jerusalem, the big settlements, and talking about it. And I think any dialogue is good. It's positive.
I want to be optimistic, but I'm realistic, and I think it's a dead end. I think the Hamas don't want the peace process to start again.
The leader of Jewish settlers in the West Bank, Dajani, condemned the move towards establishment of a Palestinian state at the Annapolis conference. Others said the parties would have most difficulties reaching an agreement over two main core issues, Jerusalem and the refugees.
On the territorial dimension, that's probably the easiest issue to tackle, since what it's being debated, and you have that in the different blueprints, is that Israel will withdraw from most of the West Bank and will keep small percentages where you have the big settlement blocks, about half of the settlers, and in exchange you can have territorial swaps. The two other issues are the thorny ones. One is Jerusalem, the other is the right of return, the implementation of 194.
Analysts say Abbas faces a mission impossible in trying to tame Hamas-controlled Gaza, even though he may win support from some Gazans if he can persuade Israel to ease border restrictions. The pessimism was evident as some Arab commentators dismissed the relaunch of talks as a US-staged media event. Many Arabs question whether Bush would push Israel hard enough to stop occupying and building settlements on Palestinian lands.
Both Palestinians and Israelis in occupied Jerusalem have rejected the Annapolis Peace Conference. Jerusalem, where Palestinians are enduring daily harassment by Jewish settlers and extremists, is at the core of the final status negotiations that were launched today in Washington.
For the past 60 years, Abu Salim has sold newspapers in front of Damascus Gate in Jerusalem. He might have read thousands of headlines and breaking news of political negotiations. This 40-year-old headline reads, "Jews wreak havoc in the holy shrine ahead of the Islamic conference." In his opinion, Annapolis is just a waste of ink on a piece of paper.
This conference will not lead to any results. Many conferences have been held in the past. The Palestinian plight has indeed gone with the wind. First, the U.S. is hostile toward the Palestinian people. Second, Olmert can't make decisions because the extremists in Israel are in control.
Just like many Jerusalem residents, Abu Salim doesn't trust Israel and has no confidence in past negotiations. He believes that Annapolis will not lead to a solution to the current problems in the Palestinian territories.
These negotiations are useless. Israel has created a new status quo in Jerusalem. It built Jerusalem in a way that it is impossible to divide it once again.
Jerusalem was indeed divided by the apartheid wall and further separated by military checkpoints. In addition, the 1967 borderline has been marginalized as Jewish settlements intertwined with one another in and around the old city.
Frankly, I don't think that Jerusalem will be returned to us. However, God willing, something good will happen.
In each conference or round of talks that Israel has engaged in, it always demanded that Jerusalem be excluded from the negotiations.
The Annapolis Conference aims at harmonizing Israel's relationship with the Arab states rather than solving the Palestinian plight.
Annapolis doesn't bring good news to the residents of Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the residents in Jerusalem hope that the conference will not lead to more Palestinian compromises. Sharouk Asad, Dubai TV, Occupied Jerusalem.
For the Palestinians in the occupied territories, the Annapolis Conference means more unrest and violence. The first Annapolis casualty was the death of a Palestinian man in the West Bank. The man was killed in an anti-Annapolis protest, which was banned by the security forces. In addition, similar protests broke out in the Gaza Strip, which is under the control of Hamas security forces. Our correspondents Amani Abu Gantash and Zuhir Sakala compiled the following joint reports from Ramallah and Gaza.
This crowd came out to say no to Annapolis. This news came despite an order by the Palestinian Authority banning all public demonstrations and protests in the West Bank. A Palestinian man was killed by the security forces, which tried to disperse a massive demonstration in Hebron. In addition, several Palestinians were detained by the security forces in various cities throughout the West Bank.
This is sad, painful, and horrifying. Is this how our Palestinian political system works? Did we reach this stage after many years of resistance?
It's not reasonable to assume that the entire Palestinian population supports the Annapolis Conference. By the same token, more than 60% of the Israeli public opposes Annapolis. Why do we need to crack down on those expressing their opinions?
The anger and condemnation expressed by the national resistance blocs and Islamic groups, which organized massive protests in the West Bank, were seen on the faces of these protesters and voiced by their words and demands.
We call for the release of prisoners and the creation of our Palestinian state with the holy city of Jerusalem as its capital.
Even the press was not spared in these incidents. Perhaps the attempt to quiet the opposition and prevent it from voicing its opinion raises several questions. Why and who benefits from these incidents? These questions are being raised by the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
The answers to these questions came from the streets of Gaza just hours before the Annapolis Conference. Tens of thousands of Palestinians took to the streets of Gaza in massive demonstrations against the Annapolis Conference. The protests were organized by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, which warned against the compromise of the unequivocal principles of the Palestinian plight.
We did not authorize anyone to sign in our name on any agreement or document that undermines our unequivocal national principles.
The protesters chanted anti-Annapolis slogans and called for the preserving of the unequivocal Palestinian national principles and warned against making concessions in the conference. The protests are still going on, and even if they stop for a while, it doesn't mean that a shift of position has taken place. Until a message is delivered, the situation in the Palestinian territories will continue to escalate amidst protests and opposition against the conference.
Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank react to the Annapolis Conference in this report by Khalid Al-Qassam.
It is the day after Annapolis, but the Palestinian political landscape has not changed. Those who opposed going to Annapolis also rejected what resulted from it. Those who supported going to the meeting welcomed the outcome.
What happened was an international show of support for the unequivocal Palestinian national rights and support for the efforts of President Abu Mazen in convincing the world about the justness of our plight. He clarified that his top priority is to resolve this conflict both justly and as soon as possible.
An invitation to launch peace negotiations without any international authority like the United Nations to implement international laws will put us in the same cycle of previous bilateral negotiations, which in our opinion will not lead to achieving the rights of the Palestinian people.
Also, the public's position has not changed much. However, the Palestinian public reiterated that the main test for any resolution or agreement is Israel's implementation on the ground.
They must withdraw. They must release our prisoners from the jails. They must withdraw from here. They must remove all the many checkpoints from the West Bank.
First, remove the barriers on the roads. Second, withdraw from the illegal settlements in the West Bank.
We must negotiate under the framework of Palestinians' unequivocal principles and international law, as well as grant Palestinians their rights, which they are demanding.
Perhaps it is difficult to swiftly change the Palestinian people's opinion about any of their positions, especially their political ones. Regardless of their personal views, Palestinians are known to be highly influenced by the positions of parties or factions which they are affiliated with. However, after 13 years of Palestinians trying many times to meet with their Israeli counterparts, it appears that changing the Palestinians' current reality on the ground is the only measure of whether any Israeli-Palestinian meeting, conference, or negotiation fails or succeeds. From the Palestinian territories, Khalid al-Qassam, Al-Arabiya.
So who were the big winners at Annapolis and who were the losers? Joining us now with commentary from our Tel Aviv studio is former Consul General to New York, Alon Pinkas. Alon, welcome.
Thank you, John. Good evening.
Good evening. Alon, in your mind, who gained the most from Annapolis?
Oh, I think undoubtedly Ehud Olmert, Prime Minister Olmert. He gained the continuous support of the U.S. He gained coalition stability. And I would go as far as to say that he, I mean, barring any legal complications in his other issues, he more or less ensured or guaranteed himself a clear, quiet, and smooth 2008. I cannot see Labor withdrawing from the coalition right now. I could see the media, by and large, the mainstream media, supporting the peace process. Whether you like it or not, it's a fact of life. And I definitely see him, and mind you, and I think the viewers will agree with this, the amount of times and the frequency that this former Likud and Cherut prince, Ehud Olmert, is quoting David Ben-Gurion says something about where he is headed and what kind of support he seeks.
Okay, Olmert's the big winner. Who was the big loser?
No one's the big loser here. I mean, if you look at it historically, obviously, if we isolate Annapolis, no one lost. If we take Annapolis in the Annapolis summit in a broader context, the big loser is George W. Bush, because just imagine if you happen to support what he had said and what he tried to launch last night in Annapolis. Imagine just what would have happened had he done this, had he put in the effort and the stamina and the dedication and commitment 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago. He's launching this less than 1 year into into his second and last term. I think Condoleezza Rice is trying to gain something from this, but obviously the big loser historically is going to be George W. Bush, because he has waged war on the Arab world, and now he's calling the Israeli power. I just saw Condoleezza Rice, at least Secretary of State Rice, depicting or defining the Israeli-Palestinian settlement as some kind of an American national interest. Now, if that's an American national interest, then why have they not devoted the energy and attention it warrants 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 years ago?
Alon, let's go back to the Labor Party. You're a close confidant of Defense Minister Ehud Barak. He was originally one of the skeptics of this summit. How does he feel now? Was Labor dragged into this unwillingly, or are things going to change with the coalition makeup in the future?
That's a great question. I think time will tell. There are two ways of looking at this. He was skeptical about the summit, and I think to a large extent he will remain skeptical once we move into the negotiations phase, because A, he's a defense minister, and you stand where you sit, as goes the saying, and he sits in the hot seat of the Israeli defense minister. Secondly, he's a survivor or a victim, depends how you choose to define it, of the 2000 Camp David summit. And he knows that while Prime Minister Olmert and President Bush have talked about we will not leave one stone unturned and we will deal with issues that have not been discussed before, everything was on the table and everything was discussed in 2000, and the Palestinians plainly and comprehensively and unequivocally rejected that program, rejected that plan, rejected the Clinton parameters or the Barak package or any way you call it.
The United Nations renewed its call on Israel to implement international laws related to the occupation of Syrian Golan Heights and to stop its oppressive measures against its residents and to immediately revoke its decision to confiscate it.
The United Nations renewed its demand on Israel to implement the resolutions relating to the occupied Syrian Golan Heights, and in particular UN Security Council Resolution 497, which considers that the Israeli decision to impose its laws, jurisdiction, and administration on the occupied Syrian Golan was null and void and without international legal effect. The resolution calls on Israel to cancel immediately its decision to confiscate the Golan, considering all Israel's legal and administrative measures, which it has taken or will take in order to change the features or the legal status of the occupied Syrian Golan as unjust and illegal. These acts represent a major violation of international law and the Geneva Conventions, which provide protection to civilians during wartime. This came from the Fourth Committee of the United Nations General Assembly, which approved a resolution titled the Occupied Syrian Golan, paving the way for it to be introduced in the General Assembly in the next few days. 154 countries voted in favor of the resolution. Israel alone voted against it. The United States, along with 8 other countries, mainly small Caribbean countries, abstained from the vote. The General Assembly called on Israel to stop imposing Israeli citizenship and Israeli ID cards on Syrian citizens in the Golan, as well as to stop its repressive measures against them. The General Assembly condemned Israel's violation of the Geneva Conventions relating to protection of civilians during wartime. UN member nations repeated that they do not acknowledge any of these measures that violate international law, which Israel has taken in the occupied Golan Heights.
With me is Dr. Samir Attaqi, the director of the Eastern Center for Strategic Studies. Welcome. Dr. Samir, what are your initial observations of the Annapolis conference after hearing the speeches there?
الكلمات لا تزال في إطار البروتوكول. من الواضح أن الرئيس بوش يستثمر.
I think that the speeches continue to be a matter of protocol. It's clear that President Bush is making a major investment in his legacy by trying to focus on making this conference a success. At the practical level, it may be one of the small achievements, if anything results from the conference, that he can take credit for. Perhaps American diplomacy is putting all of its weight on this conference. However, I still have major questions about the violation of international laws, about the mechanism that will be used, and about the timeline, which I believe will be difficult to finalize or resolve within the time frame of Bush's term in office, given the developments in the Middle East.
يمكن حسمها أو ربطها بالمدى الزمني المربوط ببقاء بوش في السلطة. واضح منذ البداية أن حزم.
It is clear from the beginning that the Palestinians have a list of demands, but there are no pledges to resolve their main issues or the Arabs' issues. Occupation is the main problem of the Middle East, and all the resulting tragedies stem from Israel's continuous occupations. How can these issues be dealt with?
Israel now is incapable of conducting a military operation or war. Also, the current Israeli administration is incapable of moving forward on a real peace process. And it is also unable to continue with the status quo. For this reason, it needs to put on a show with no tangible results. Perhaps it is hoped that the Annapolis conference will be that show. However, usually in international diplomacy, the situation does not end as intended by the parties involved. This conference could be utilized as a battleground to benefit the Palestinian people, the Syrian people, and all the Arabs. In principle, the success of the Arab states depends on Arab solidarity and the solidarity of the Palestinians themselves.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/Mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.